Most of our children end up interacting with other people. They interact with pediatricians who may or may not see a lot of delays. If they need specialty care, they interact with specialists who may or may not see a lot of children with delays, or may or may not see a lot of 4-year-olds. They need help coordinating that care. If not, they need somebody they trust. They go to Lone Oak Exceptional School, and they've been there 2 years. They got somebody there they trust. They trust with their child. And if that person helps them understand why it's important that they go to the orthopedic surgeon, why it's important for the orthopedic surgeon to then, take those discharge orders and give them back to the folks at Lone Oak. They need somebody they can trust to help coordinate the care. They need a safe and therapeutic environment. I know we talk a lot about natural environments, and they are very important, but we all know that sometimes a child with a lot of needs going into a traditional daycare or traditional setting of any kind, they may not, while they may get loved a lot, they may not be provided services to by somebody who's really been trained, as well as the people that we work with every day. We want to make sure that they have a safe and therapeutic environment if they choose so. And that last one's one we just added last week. That's within my community. If I was smart enough, I could run back to that thing where it said about the moratorium. Moratoriums sound good to bookkeepers. Well, we'll put a moratorium on there. Then nobody else will be able to open one. And we know then they won't grow. At least the sites won't grow. But when you're taking federal money and you're spending state tax money, you can't one day shut the door on children. You're not shutting the door on providers. That's not the issue. The issue is when you just put a blanket moratorium on a service, you're shutting the door on children. And it's not fair for children in Montgomery County. And I'm thinking Montgomery County doesn't have a clinic, but it might. But let's pretend it doesn't. The people in Montgomery County, all of a sudden, they can't have access to the same service as somebody in Polk County. Now, it's different if nobody wants to go there and they live so far away from town that there's no way to get their child to a clinic. When you live out in rural areas, sometimes you're choosing that. You're choosing to have access to only 1 or 2 doctors, and that's their choice. But if we've got 3 or 4 providers who would be willing to go to Montgomery County, but we've made a rule because of budget issues that say, well, I'm sorry, you can't go there. We're discriminating against the children in that county. So you really can't put a hard moratorium on for any service for children. You have to leave what the lawyers refer to as a relief valve. And having been sued many, many times over clinic-based services, I can tell you that relief valve has to be very easy to see and very easy to access for parents. And we think that we have a pretty good relief valve in the way we manage expansion for the DDTCS clinics. And I have talked to some of the CHMS providers about maybe let's all get on the same page with how that relief valve is established, how we manage expansion, so that if there's enough of a market in any community in Arkansas that those parents can access service, and it's not that, well, they missed the deadline. It just can't be about that. This is an odd slide, but I couldn't figure out where to put it, but we needed to talk about it. People talk about the core service in DDTCS. I talk about it too. And the core service being habilitation, because that's what brings it all together. That's where all the therapy is reinforced. And it dawned on me last week that many of the people I'm having discussions with, not you guys, but the people over in Medicaid and over in DHS and over in the legislature, don't necessarily understand what a core service is in one of our clinics. And it's really the core service for any child or adult who gets services for their disability. It's a comprehensive and integrated plan of care developed by an interdisciplinary team. And it's individualized, which I didn't even put in my little description because I knew all of you guys knew that. I need to go back and add it. I think that's what makes us different than other services. We know that for the most part, when we get somebody and we start taking care of them, we're going to take care of them for a while. It's not like an appendicitis where you cure them of it, send them on, or upper respiratory infection, or even pregnancy. We usually got them for a while. We do a very good job of planning our care. What we've got to do in order to make sure everybody else understands it is make them understand how we determine how much care somebody gets. When I asked down there what's necessary for a comprehensive interdisciplinary care plan, the first thing is an assessment. Now, a lot of y'all sat through us talking about the assessment for adults and the school-age children, and we all agreed that it had to be universal. And we agreed that it'd be better if a third party was doing it, because we were going to set prices based on that. Based on that assessment, we're going to decide how much care you get a year, and we're going to let your care team decide, your interdisciplinary team, rather than us deciding in Little Rock or deciding over in Medicaid. We want people to decide how best to spend those resources at the local level. Now, that's not as easy for preschoolers, and I'm going to go through and tell you why I don't think it's easy, and then I'm going to listen to people if they want to argue me out of it, or if you just want to argue with each other. While it's always, when you're talking to bookkeepers and folks who run big health plans, such as Medicaid, everybody likes universal assessments. And I do too, but I've talked to the therapy associations, and they've convinced me, and maybe they can convince y'all, or maybe you don't need convincing, that because children present with so many different types of problems, and there's such a difference in the ages, doing an evaluation assessment on a 6-month-old is a lot different than a 5-year-old. That given that the therapies, OT, PT, and speech, have their associations and Medicaid and the private payers have worked hard to develop a list of acceptable assessments. Ken runs the company that is doing the assessments for our adults. And he's hired 12 or 15 folks and trained them and burdened them with our crummy IT system over at DHS. But they're going around right now and doing the assessments. Now, they're doing them for the adults, and we've already talked about the fact they probably won't have to do them every year unless something changes. So you're talking about 4,000 people for now, 4 or 5. Even when we open things up with CFC, we're talking about 8 to 10 that don't have to be assessed every year. That's manageable, and we can probably afford it. When we're talking about doing something like that for preschoolers, I'm just going to tell you what I think, then I want to hear what you think. With preschoolers, it is so technical, I think, and it is the interaction between the child and the person giving the test is so important. I'm not sure, one, that we could find enough qualified people to do it, given that we got 18,000 kids, and we'd have to do them every 6 months for the most part. Even if we only did them once a year, that's a huge number of assessments. It's very expensive. One of the unintended consequences of doing that might be that more people got eligible than should be. Claire's as easygoing and as a sweet little girl as she can be. And a lot of y'all know her. But the first time you see her, and maybe even the second and third, until she gets used to you, she's liable to hide behind me or go find something else to be interested in. and I can see some stranger coming in from somewhere else and trying to assess her, they might very well determine she can't talk right. I don't know if she can go to the bathroom. Nobody can tell me. She looks like she can walk okay, but I can't get her to be still long enough. And I'm not sure that we would get the best picture of what's good for that child. And I'd hate to know we based either eligibility or resources on those an assessment done like that. I mean, and maybe a bigger issue or as big an issue is when you get down to it in our field, there's about 4 people who can do the majority of the assessments. OT, PT, and speech, that's licensed folks who need to do those assessments. And then a certified P4 teacher, which everybody in this room can tell you can't find them. We can't find them at the at the DDTCS clinics. I'm pretty sure nobody else can find them either. The school districts can't. So I doubt 100 or 200 of those folks are going to drop in our lap and volunteer to drive all over Arkansas. Now, that's just my opinion. There is another way. The providers do it now. We have retrospective reviews on some of the assessments and some of the therapy. I know that Medicaid wants to beef that up, and that's fine. That might be a way we can get around the workforce issue and the relationship issue between the assessor and the child.
Therapy evaluations determine eligibility for therapy, but they also determine the eligibility for habilitation right now. Even though we use the ELAP or the Battelle or the Carolina or whatever other tests, those set goals and objectives for the children, but it doesn't determine the eligibility. It's still the therapy evaluations that do that.
Charlie, one thing that we've believed for a long time in the field is that children gain more when you intervene at the earliest stage possible, when there's developmental delays or developmental disabilities. And the thing about retrospective reviews, the reason that we went, prior authorization rather than retrospective reviews, is that there were so many delays. And many times we would have children that had already passed critical developmental stages while we were waiting to get the prior authorizations to begin the services. And they do change pretty fast, even though they have developmental disabilities. So I would think that the retrospective would be preferable to the prior authorizations.
Thanks Rita for bringing that up. I had forgotten to mention that when I was talking about the assessments, that y'all all know how bad bureaucracies can be, and DDS is just as bad as everywhere else. And we can't allow a 3-month-old or a 6-month-old or a 2-year-old who's so close to being able to catch up with his peers. We can't allow him to sit at home and not get the therapy when he needs it. So I tend to agree with Rita, but I also know that I don't know as much about it as the people in this room.
What Rita was saying on the retrospective reviews, in addition, if we go that direction for retro, is to have them on site and not via the mail, the scanning, the number of trees that we're killing, in what we do in the therapy world right now, which is crazy. So we would like it to be on site. And that way, too, if there's a question about the medical history of the child, they've got the whole chart and not just one piece of the chart.
And
question.
They might get to see
they might get to see the child, yes.
An actual child getting actual therapy.
Yes.
I had a big smile on my face when you started talking about that, because I really like it when people who are making rules go look at the children. But I know that some of that might be cost prohibitive, and I'm not the one that gets to that necessarily has to write the check for that. But I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, on the millions of dollars of recoupments, I think we're talking about the RAC audits on hospitals. So I think that's where that comes into play. So I don't think necessarily talking about these services here. And the question about the cost of submitting records, for the work that we do at AFMC, we would have you submit the records electronically. I agree. I don't want to cut down trees and have you Xerox. So if you're not able to electronically submit your records, then I think that's an issue that you need to address to fix. And the question of prior authorization versus a retroactive review, that's fine if you prefer the retroactive review, but understand you get into the pay and chase and recoupment, and you may well be at risk of paying back money that you've already spent for therapies versus if it's prior approved, you at least have more assurance there on that. So you need to balance that.